Hello, and welcome to another of the Nautical Institute's webinar series. I am David Petrejko. I'm with the Nautical Institute staff in London headquarters, and I'm joined today by Walter Vervloesem from his home in Antwerp. Good morning, Walter.
Good morning, David. Good morning, everybody.
Right. Before we start, and we've got a fairly full program today, we'll probably go about an hour and a quarter. Just a few housekeeping notes. Okay, the Nautical Institute, first and foremost, we are an international professional body. Our main role is helping our members with their professional development, and we represent them in the industry. This is a very important task for us, and it is a great value of being a member of the Nautical Institute. Now, because we're a membership organization, I will be shameless in inviting you to become a member if you are not already a member. And that's not just because I'm sitting here with the vice president. So please do become a member if you can. Now, as a professional body, we worry very much about safety, and mooring is, as Walter will explain, a very dangerous operation and requires great care of both equipment and people. So it is unsurprising that we have produced some books on the subject of mooring. We have a couple here. This one in particular was written by Walter. So he will tell you all about that. Right, before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. This is an interactive session. You will not have access to your microphone and your camera, but you will have the ability to type in questions. So you have a control panel that's probably up in your upper right-hand corner of your screen, and you have a little white arrow in an orange field that expands or contracts your control panel. When it's expanded, you have a number of different options here. One is to type a question in the question box and submit it, and you can do that at any time during the presentation or during the Q&A, and we will try to get to it. Please keep it as short and succinct as possible. That really helps me when I manage the questions. There are also a few handouts that you can download, and if for any reason the webinar software goes into the background, there'll probably be a little button like this on the bottom of your screen, and if you tap that, the webinar should come back on top. We will also have a couple of interactive polls during the presentation. To participate in that, you click the option that you want until it goes gray, and then you must press the submit button. If you do not press submit, it will not be submitted. After the webinar, there will be a pop-up survey for your information. We would really appreciate you giving us a few answers there. It helps us improve our service. In about 3 or so hours after the webinar, you will get an email thanking you for attendance, and there will be a link to a certificate if you want to click on that and print it off or save it. Please feel free to do so. In any case, a recording of this webinar will probably by tomorrow be available on our YouTube channel. Just go into YouTube, type the Nautical Institute, and you'll come up with our channel, and we'll have the recording of this webinar and many that we've done in the past. Now, there are a lot of you out there. Earlier this morning, there were almost 700. I think we're probably up to about 700. So like I say, if you ask a question, please keep it short and succinct so that we can get to it. Right, so Walter started his professional career as a mariner, which many of us have. He came ashore in 1988 as a surveyor and has been a surveyor for over 30 years. Sorry, Walter, I don't want to make you sound old. We'll say experienced. So in that 30 years, Walter has seen an awful lot of mooring systems, and he has a great interest in it, which he will share. One of the things that I like about Walter is he does believe that pictures give 1,000 words. So it's a very pictorial book and a very pictorial presentation. Walter joined IMCS in '95, became the chairman in 2000. He produced our book in 2009. He founded the IMCS Academy in 2014. And as I said, he has been a vice president for a few years now and is a great advisor to the Nautical Institute. So, Walter, I'm going to be trying to be very slick and make you the presenter.
Okay.
And there you go.
There we are. I think we should be up and running now, David. Can you confirm?
Yes, Walter, you have the con.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and whoever is attending this webinar, a very rainy welcome actually from Antwerp and Belgium. It's a privilege to give this webinar on mooring equipment and inspections. And basically, I would like to thank the Institute to give me this opportunity in presenting this webinar. Let us start actually by defining or by talking about the mooring station itself. And in my opinion, I mean, there is no other place where people are calling other people's names than on those mooring stations. Now, actually, a mooring station, we all know, is a dangerous zone. But I mean, it should not be a name calling zone. So I think that from the moment people start calling other people names, I mean, then we are dealing with situations that that indicate stress, panic, uncertainty, and so on. We all know that mooring operations, they are complex, difficult, dangerous, and in many cases, they are carried out after long river passages. People are tired, it's during nighttime, bad weather, and so on. And we also know that generally the junior officers are in charge of the mooring decks. I mean, second mates, third mates, they are on the stations forward and aft, and they are most probably commanding a crew that is older than them, that has more experience with mooring operations, which actually puts them sometimes in a difficult position. On top of that, we have to realize that we are actually having a skeleton crew on the mooring decks, nowadays certainly. And what I can see out of my experience is that whilst the mooring operations are complex, the accidents are generally the cause of infringements or violations against basic and simple rules. And that will actually be our focus for today. It's about those basic and simple things that allow us to make a quantum leap forward when we are talking about safety issues and accidents. We know that mooring equipment and mooring operations are related to accidents. And accidents, they generally present themselves in the forms of injury, breakaway, pollution, and we will normally tend to analyze and to find out what the causes are for these accidents. For today, the methodology of this presentation will be that we will try to raise awareness about the proper mooring issues through easily identifiable do's and don'ts. We're going to highlight some basic principles about ropes, wire, winches, and fittings, and in an attempt to provide a deeper understanding of frequently seen problems. Basically, we will try to answer the question why when a specific issue is raised as a defect or an observation. So the goal of our presentation today is definitely to enhance safety, to allow people to adopt a more organized approach of mooring operations, to review and to reconsider current mooring procedures, and basically to carry out meaningful inspections. And we will come back to that, of course, at a later stage. And by adopting this approach, we will see that this presentation may be relevant for active crew sailing on board, but also for the ship staff on board, bridge team, pilot, companies, charterers, terminal people, as well as a little bit more from the procedural part, the DPAs, the CQs, the masters, for their review of the safety management system, and also to crew, superintendents and surveyors in order to help them with making the meaningful inspections. So, as I said already, mooring goes hand in hand with accidents, and it should not be that way, but quite regularly we will see that mooring accidents and reports are hitting our desk. So when we have those statistics, what we can see is that line failure is killing about 300 people every year. And when we look to personal injury cases related, we know that 95% of the injury cases are linked to lines and ropes. And about 60% of those mooring incidents, they are, or let's say 60% of all those injury cases are related to mooring incidents. And from those mooring incidents, we know that 60% is usually snapback triggered. And unfortunately, 1 out of the 7 cases results in death, fatalities. In other cases, we see parted lines due to other causes, but most of the injuries, apart from snapback, are caused by ropes jumping or slipping of drum ends and bits and so on. The basic issue for today is actually that mooring accidents, I mean, we see too many of them, and it's already ongoing for a long, long time. And basically, still the basic issues and good practice is systematically being overlooked. And I really do hope that with this presentation, we will be able to drive the message home and to highlight a few items that you can take with you in your day-to-day business, and with the goal of making those mooring operations safer, better, and more efficient. Because that is where it all comes down to. From the moment that we see that we have an accident on the mooring decks, I mean, it results in injury, it may result in pollution, and it may result in various forms of damage. I mean, that can be caused by breakaway, that can be damage to the ship itself, but also to shore equipment and so on. So we do know that mooring operations, and from the moment that accidents occur, we are far from being efficient. As David already said, the Institute is concerned about the safety of mariners, and we found it appropriate to write a book on mooring. And basically, David showed you that there are 2 volumes. Volume 1 goes about the practice and the theory. Volume 2 goes about the more practical inspection and do's and don't criteria. So the book, as said, is very pictorial. It has a red and green section with photographs of good things and bad things, which makes it easy to understand. And more importantly, the book is accompanied by a CD-ROM, which you can find in the pouch at the back end of the book. And it contains reports of Mars on mooring and anchoring. And it also includes a self-assessment section for those people and companies who want to install a little bit of a training scheme. I mean, the book lends itself perfectly well for that. And you have the self-assessment scheme with the questions, and also the answers are included on the CD-ROM. So when we talk about mooring accidents and their causes, we will see that there are a wide variety of factors involved. I try to categorize them as basically being the human element, technical issues, operational issues, and then the documentary issues and procedures. And as we know, the human part is mainly related to lack of mooring knowledge and mooring skills, both theoretical and practical, but also we have to face reality that in many cases we are not having sufficient crew on the decks for having that comfortable feeling of knowing that we can manage all. On top of that, we see that inspections are not always carried out as they should be. There is poor communication between the stations and the bridge, between the crew on the mooring decks, with the pilot, linesman, tugboats, and so on. And we also see that there is lack of familiarization with the ship's equipment. On top of that, we have fatigue, we have complacency, and another important thing, in my opinion, is that we do not have sufficient emergency management training. What do I mean with that? Is that when the operations are ongoing, a rope fails, equipment fails, we have an accident, weather conditions, they worsen or they interfere with the operations at that moment. Many people are left with no clue as to how to handle and deal with such a situation. From a technical point of view, we can actually see that we have improper maintenance due to insufficient knowledge about wear limits for the brakes, ropes, wires, and so on, and also because there is no time for equipment inspection. The schedules on board are already so busy that very often, this does not get the attention or the priority it deserves. When we talk about inspections, we see far too much general type checklists, the typical item, and then the yes, the no, the not applicable, the not inspected, and so on. Furthermore, we also see that we have a planned maintenance system, and in many cases, that planned maintenance system is actually not really sufficiently specific, not sufficiently detailed, and it's only addressing the technical items. So I will show you an example of an abstract from a planned maintenance system, and you will see that people say, well, okay, we have the windlass, make a visual check, grease it up, next line, oil it, and basically next line, grease up, open the type gear, and so on. We then say, okay, it's satisfactory or not satisfactory, whatever, and then we are fine again for another 4 months. And from my point of view, I think that we have to consider that this may not really be what we are looking for. It's not the best that we can do, and especially not if we are talking about critical equipment like mooring and anchoring equipment. I think it deserves much more. If you see that question, windlass, make a visual check, okay, what does that visual check really mean? Is the windlass still there? Tick the box. Or does it mean that we have checked things like the gypsy, clutches, bow stoppers, securing arrangements, hose pipes, and that type of things? And then we come to the final issue, is that you must know how to inspect specific things. What do you have to look for? What are the criteria? That is really important, and that is what, in my opinion, is generally missing. Other things that fall under the name of the technical issues are cheap spares. Of course, there is a challenge nowadays, economically, financially, to buy equipment and to pay or try to pay the right price. But when we talk about ropes, there is that saying that says, well, a good rope is not cheap and a cheap rope is not good. I leave it a little bit to everyone to consider what they think of this, but there is definitely a ground of truth in that. Another problem that we see are incorrect spares. Spares are being ordered, but either they are ordered wrongly or they arrive different than the order on board. We can get problems with incorrect rope strength, incorrect rope diameter, incorrect length, all things that we will see later during this webinar will have an impact on the efficiency and the safety of mooring operations. Also, a very important thing that we have to identify is poor design. In many cases, we go on board and we see faulty mooring arrangements, faulty mooring patterns, and what do we see? this is the only way that it can be done. The crew is facing challenges in getting things right because the equipment that is provided to them is not really fit for the intended mooring patterns that they have to do. So things like insufficient space, no safe passage, improper fleeting angles, improper positioning of fair leads, chocks, bits, winch controls, dark zones, areas which are blacked out when you are in control of the mooring station, that you don't see where things are, what is happening in certain areas, improper lighting, and also to consider that in many cases ships may be designed for specific trades, but what is happening once the ship becomes a second-hand ship? I mean, is the trade still similar to what it was before, or will it be different? Because most likely we will see different mooring patterns when trading requirements are changing as well. So from an operational point of view, we see that there is poor planning of mooring operations. We see poor organization. There is no pre-mooring meetings, no preparation with sufficient time to do it in a proper way. We also see that there are dangerous practices arising because there is time pressure and because of lack of crew. And also, we see that there are dangerous situations once we are involved in an emergency. Then it really becomes firefighting, and unfortunately, that is where things tend to go worse even more. And we also see that there are accidents due to lack of post-mooring follow-up. No proper inspection of the ropes, the winches, not of other ships mooring ahead or astern of us. So different things that we can say from the operational part. And finally, I mean, also from a documentary point of view, we will see that there are quite a lot of voids or gaps when it comes down to mooring procedures, whether it's from the safety management system point of view or from the master's review that should contain proper feedback on why a procedure related to mooring is actually not working. We see that risk analysis is not really well embedded. Also, root cause analysis is not implemented or carried out as much as it should be. The emergency procedures are generally either not addressed or quite light. The need for reporting near misses and accidents is also not always followed or recognized. And in safety meetings, we seldom see that mooring problems, mooring incidents are included. And finally, people should be aware of the fact that decent record keeping is always going to help when disaster strikes. So these are all things that I found were well placed under the documentary issues. Now, before we start with the practical part, I mean, when we talk about mooring accidents, we very often consider the cause to be a standalone problem, and that is not always true. If we take the very straightforward and frequently example of a rope failure, we can say, well, the rope broke and there was a breakaway incident or a fatality or anything like that. But when you dig in, when you go more into detail and when you go really towards root cause analysis, what do we see? That that rope failure may be the result of different things which are not done correctly. We can have, for instance, incorrect installation with twists, bends, improper storage of the mooring ropes, improper manipulation of the rope, improper inspection, not giving proper regard to the type and strength of the mooring rope, mooring station organization, non-familiarity with the equipment that is used to handle that rope. So you will see that just by a simple example, all these things are actually playing a role in finding out what was the real cause and how and what we have to do when we are investigating accidents in order to prevent accidents from happening again. So I think we are coming here to a point that David may want to launch a poll.
Okay, thanks, Walter. Here it comes. Right, so folks, what is the biggest problem that leads to incidents and accidents on the moorings? Please click what you think is the most or the biggest problem and click the submit. And Walter, I'll just let that run for a minute while you can carry on.
Yeah, okay. So as I said, I mean, I think it is a privilege that we can hold this webinar and that I can actually present it on this very interesting subject. Now, as I already said, the Nautical Institute has identified the reason or the importance of mooring accidents. On the other hand, we are also keen, as the Nautical Institute, to help mariners in a very practical way, and we are always pleased if we can do something for the mariners. And then I really think that
okay, Walter.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Walter. I'm just going to share the results.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Good. Perfect.
80% of the people voted.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So we can actually see that the results are quite balanced between the procedures, the equipment, and the crew on the mooring stations. But we can see also that most votes were going actually to the crew issue. And I think, I mean, that also endorses or that also relates or allies with my personal idea. So having said that, having done that poll, I think we can now go towards a more practical part of our presentation. Just a moment. Okay. Good. So David, are we up and running again?
Yes, off you go, Walter.
Okay. Thank you. So as we said, we know that mooring operations involve different types of equipment. I mean, we have ropes, we have the wires, we have winches, we have fittings, and all those things are actually going to be dealt with during the remaining part of this seminar. So when we are talking about the mooring ropes, we know that there is a need to inspect them. And when we are going to inspect mooring ropes, what are we going to look for? Because that is, remember that slide of the plant maintenance system, we can say mooring ropes check and everything is done. But on the other hand, I mean, that is not really, at least in my opinion, what is needed to ensure that the equipment that we have in front of us is still fit for duty. So I think it may help to focus on a few frequently seen types of problems or damages that we see with mooring ropes. And I think, okay, I think you can see when I'm hovering with my mouse over the screen. So what you see or what you have to look for is, of course, in the first place, physical damage. If the ropes are damaged, strands broken and so on, that is already a very clear sign that things may not really be okay. Secondly, we can look to fusion damage. That's perhaps an interesting one because fusion is created when we are slacking away a rope over a bit or over the drum end of the winch. And basically, due to the heat, we get elevated temperatures that cause fusion of the fibers of the rope. That makes the rope glazy, that makes it hard, and it makes it slippery. So we don't get a good, let's say, friction anymore between the rope and the surface. And of course, that can lead to slipping. Another frequently seen problem is pollution. I mean, if we get, or contamination, if we get the rope to come in contact with sawdust, with blasting grit, with oil, with grease, and so on, those chemicals may actually affect the structure of the fibers. and abrasive elements, they may actually become embedded in the interior, in the inside of the rope, and have a very abrasive action, which will lead to further weakening of the rope and failure in the end. And that is not always visible very well from visually and externally. Therefore, you have to open up the rope and see if everything inside is also okay. Other things that you have to look for is kinks. I mean, depending on the type of rope, the way that it is handled, you can create kinks, and kinks are actually bends in the rope, which are uncontrolled and which are very often very sharp bends, which cause damage to the fibers of the mooring rope. And if that is repeated, or if the rope would not be unkinked before further use, we are going to cause serious damage to the rope structure. Other things are that we will look for are abrasing and chafing damage. As you can see here, we see contact of the rope with a rubbing bar here on the ship side, resulting in damage. We can see gangways riding over our mooring ropes and again cutting or causing damages. We can also see compression damage between, if a rope is caught between the fender and the ship, I mean, that is compressing the rope, that is putting excessive pressure on the fibers of the rope and causing damage. And of course, we can also see improper repairs, I mean, even with bolts, as you can see here, or with bowline knots and different types of arrangements, which are going to cause a problem. Remember that if you make knots in a mooring rope, I mean, that is going to cause, again, a little bit like kinking, twisting of the material over a bending ratio which is not what it should be, and that is resulting in damage. Okay. Then let us not only look to the technical issues, but also let's have a look to the bad practices. Imagine that I'm a surveyor and I'm approaching the vessel. What am I going to see here? I will see that the mooring lines are not equally tensioned. So that actually means that we are going to transfer loads on the remaining lines. We will see that mooring ropes are passed through the chocks together with mooring wires. Remember, the mooring wires, they are generally greased. You get contact with grease on the mooring ropes. Also, the mooring wires, they will chip off the paint of the chock, making it rough, and our mooring rope will suffer from that. And also, on older or more frequently used chocks, we will see grooving of the wire into the surface of the chock, which is also going to cut into our mooring rope. So definitely not good practice. Another thing is that we may see that the roller of the gangway is ironing our mooring rope, and again causing flattening, causing compression and serious damage to the rope. On this one, of course, we see that the rope is being cut by a sharp edge of a gangway. So all these things are actually not good practice, and as you will be able to see, I marked them with a red cross. So just to draw your attention to the fact that these pictures should not be considered as examples of how it should be done. Further bad practice is actually the crisscrossing of mooring ropes. I mean, here we will see mooring ropes passing around a button roller fairlead, and that results invariably in chafing damage in these areas. Again, chafing damage causing damage to the fibers may cause heating damage also, so definitely something that should not be done. About the leads around the fairleads, we are going to tackle that later on. Also, we will see that mooring ropes may come in contact with other items on the deck, like brackets or frames, or like in this case, the sharp edge of a safe hole, again resulting in damage. Also down below, we will see rather new mooring ropes being passed inappropriately through the roller fairlead, where we see, again, chafing and compression damage, and also cutting damage with the closing structure of the fair lead here in this area. All things which are actually resulting in damage or which may result in damage. And we always have to take into account that these things are extremely easy to avoid, and they are going to prolong the in-service life of the ropes, which in the end are always costing a lot of money. Good practice, what we consider good practice, just a few things here, is to have those handling or tail lines on the loop of the mooring rope. That is safety for the people ashore in safe handling of the rope when they are putting it in, when they are when it's required to let the mooring rope go. The same thing goes about sleeves and or chafe guards, and also protection for the loop. We are not going to talk too much about mooring wires, but basically, when we are using wires, we see more or less the same problem. We can see problems with compression and flattening, like you see here, due to improper spooling of the wire on the winch drum. We can see improper connections, like here with a cow hitch, or here just simply making a loop on a wire and a tail, and joining the loop with bulldog grips, which is absolutely bad practice and not done. We can see breaks in the strands as a result of improper operation, sometimes also because we are bending the wire over a pin or a roller which has not the right diameter, or we can see kinking of the wire again. And just like with ropes, kinking is causing a big problem. Okay, so that actually leads us to another thing, and that is the second part of our practical part of this webinar, and that's about mooring winches. And I'm just going to touch very briefly two basic principles. And the first basic principle is that our rope should actually be pulling against the anchored end of the winch. What does that mean? I will try to explain it short and clearly. Is that when we have a pulling force on this rope, actually the drum is pushing against the brake lining, and by this action we get increased friction and we get increased security. At the same time, due to this pulling action, we will see that the brake lever is pulled slightly upwards, and that may give the impression that our brake handle is loose. And we see it quite frequently that people during their inspection round on the mooring decks, they are feeling to the brake handle, and then they feel that it is a little bit loose, and they will tighten it up again. And the next time they may do that again. And at a certain point, we are going to create a situation where the winch is not going to render when it is necessary. And we may face, because of that, rope failure. Take the time to study this drawing and to read the accompanying text, because that may make it more clear for people who are not really familiar with it. A second thing that we have as a basic principle is that we have the rated holding capacity of a brake, which is 80% of the mooring line MBL, but we have that in order to prevent that the mooring rope will break before the brake slips or before the winch is rendering, as we say. Now, what you have to understand is that the number of layers on the rope drum of the winch is going to determine when the winch will render. In other words, it means that if we have one layer on the drum or on the winch drum, I mean, then we will need a relatively high pulling power to ensure that the brake or that the winch is going to render. On the other hand, if we have several layers, we will see that the lever between the last layer of the rope, and the axle or the axis of the winch will be much bigger. And so we have a bigger lever, which actually means that with a softer or with a more gentle pulling power, we will create a load that will give the signal to the winch to render. So it is actually something where we say, well, if we have a bigger lever between the outer or the last turn of the rope and the middle of the winch, I mean, then we will require less power to make the winch render. Now let us put that in a little bit of a practical example. And what we see here is that we have a mooring rope going over the side, passing through a roller, then passing around the bit, and again around the second post of the bit, and again around a roller, and then it is being led to our mooring winch. What we see, or what we have to know, and especially if we would not have rollers, but if we would have solid shocks, I mean, then we create points of friction here, 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 and here. Same would be if the roller would not be moving freely, we get the same problem. So basically, before our winch would get a signal that it is time to render, the load that we have, the effective load between this chock or roller and the bollard on the key may be much higher. Why? Because the force that is transmitted to the winch is actually less than the effective force that we have between the bollard and the ship side. And these are cases where we see that ropes are failing between the bollard and the ship, and that actually the winch has not rendered. And this is a quite frequently seen type of failure. And I hope that this will help you in understanding that we have to be very careful when we are talking about rendering of the winch and about reducing the number of friction points that we have. That friction effect is even enhanced when our equipment, the chocks and the surfaces of the bits and rollers and so on, are not smooth, when they are rough, when they are corroded. That is going to increase the friction and may even become more risky. So we know that winches are high risk equipment, and that is actually the reason why we have to inspect them. And winches are complicated because we have those different designs and types, different ways that they are being operated with steam, hydraulics, electric, and so on. So definitely it's complicated equipment. And when we are going to inspect those items, or when we are going to inspect winches, we will have to look for safety issues. We will have to look for issues that affect operational efficiency, pollution, and structural things. So I'm going to show you a few frequently seen problems that may have an effect on one of those elements, or perhaps on more than one. When we have safety, when we look to the safety issues, for sure you will agree that proper marking of sharp edges, platforms, is useful in highlighting areas where you can have an accident. What do we see is that, I mean, especially during nighttime, sharp edges or edges of platforms may be causing what we call stupid accidents. If you just hit with your leg a sharp corner like here, I mean, it may not really be a severe injury, but it may actually lead to your thoughts being elsewhere rather than with the mooring operations. And if it is a little bit more serious, even a small cut in your hand may really affect your further performance on the mooring deck, or may even lead to not being able to continue with your assigned task and duties. And as a result of that, I mean, you will face a reduction of manpower available for safe mooring at that moment. And that is why I mean, marking is very often considered to be a cosmetical issue, but in my opinion, it's much more important than just a cosmetic thing. Same goes for marking of moving parts, indicating on the winch the paying out direction, heaving, slack, testing dates, and so on. And something that I really would like to emphasize is to ensure that on the mooring decks you have non-slip paint or non-slip surfaces, because slips and falls, they happen so quickly and they can have actually serious consequences. Also, over here, I mean, at the end you will see levers for the clutches, which have to be marked at the extremity so that you don't walk against them or that you don't run into them. And also the safety pin that is there to secure the clutch in a specific position is extremely important. Now, we know that the efficiency of a winch is mainly dictated by the holding power or by the brake holding power of the winch. So those brakes, they are really important. And obviously, we would look for damage, and I think this is quite clear that the brake is not fit for duty anymore. What is less considered is, for instance, this one, where we see that flakes, rust flakes, are breaking down from the drum surface of the brake, and as such, they are causing an irregular surface. And that means that the brake lining, the friction element, is actually not touching equally over the complete drum surface, which is going to result in less efficient holding power. So that is something that needs to be considered. And if you look to the patches where you have rust and scale flaking off, I mean, that can mean that you have a serious reduction in holding power of your winch. Another frequently seen issue is that people are using cheater bars to operate those levers of the clutches because it's so difficult to move them. They should not be difficult to move. They should be able to be operated by a normal man or woman, I mean, without any problem. Generally, if they are using cheater bars, there is another problem that may be, I mean, more structural or technically related, or just because it has not been properly greased. There is a reason for using it. So try to find out what it is. Another thing which is looked or considered as a cosmetical issue, namely painting of the drum surface of the warping ends. For sure, it looks nice when everything is nicely painted, but what is not frequently known or well known is that we are using those warping ends to wind up our mooring rope. So we get friction between the rope and the surface of the drum, and the paint may become chafed. You may actually have chips of paint detaching from the surface, and they will settle inside of the rope, and there they will be left for cutting action, abrasion, and causing internal damage to the rope. So also, if it is not well painted, the paint itself may move across or around the drum itself under the influence of pressure of the rope. So painting that that mating surface on the winch drum or on the warping end surface is not a good idea. Another operational issue is that, especially when people are faced with limited crew on the mooring decks, that they cannot do everything at the same time, and so they have to operate the winch and do the moorings and so on. And in many cases, we see that they are using weights to put around the handle, and then that keeps the winch or the warping end or the capstan running. Dangerous practice, absolutely not recommended. Another thing is the linkage. Brake linkage should be fit for duty and should be strong. And if we see that it is basically deformed, corroded, or that parts of the linkage are tied together with a steel wire, I mean, that is definitely indicating a problem. Remember that it is with the brake handle and through the linkage that we are relaying power to our brake band. So definitely all those parts should be strong and in good condition. Another efficiency related issue is related to ropes. When we have winches, can be dedicated winches, can be split type, can be capstans, whatever, warping ends and so on. I mean, we have to now go back to a few slides or a few slides back where we discussed that brake holding capacity and where we explained the lever that is actually acting on the winch or on the mooring system. And you will agree with me that if your mooring ropes are not properly coiled up, you create a big lever over here, even more on this one. And we will actually create at that moment a dangerous situation, causing the winch actually not to render properly. Also here, we can see on a split type drum winch, we can see that the rope passing on to the tension part is being jammed, is being compressed. Also, too much layers on the tension part or the working part of that split drum winch. Another frequently and a dangerous problem is burying in of the ropes into the remaining layers on the rope drum. And what do we see? I mean, this rope is being pulled down or pulled inside of the stack of turns on the drum, which makes that it is jammed. And when we are going to cast off and we will slack away, we will see that in the first instance, this rope will become a little bit slack, sufficient for the people ashore to think, yeah, okay, I can grab the loop of the rope and pull it over. But as we slack away more, I mean, the turns will be picked up again and it would squeeze the people's hands between the rope and the bollard. It's a type of accident that is not unique. It is quite regularly seen. That's also the reason why we suggest to have those handling or tail lines connected to the loop of the mooring rope. And of course, I mean, last but not least, and that is seen on almost every vessel, we see that people are using the warping ends of a winch to secure mooring ropes. Dangerous practice. If the rope is there and another ship is passing by, causing a little bit of swell and so on, all the load that is on the mooring rope will be transferred to the warping end and to the axle of the winch and may cause damage. If then that winch is a combined winch together with a windlass, you are ending up with a system where you have a windlass which may be damaged, and that is, of course, as we all know, a very serious issue. Another important thing is the structure of the winch. If we know that a lot of loads are acting on the winch, then for sure we know that the structure should be okay. So we look for corrosion of the brackets, of the bedding structure, and also to, as we can see here, on the flange of the rope drum, which is knife edged, very thin, and can actually cause damage to our mooring ropes. Often overlooked, but winches, and especially then when they are powered with hydraulics, they are a source of pollution. If we have leakage from the hydraulic system, and especially when it is raining on the decks and so on, I mean, that rainwater and oily mixture may be washed overboard, and then we end up with oily patches. And nowadays, I mean, a small patch is sufficient to cause big problems. So definitely using drip buckets or having save holes which are damaged is not really the way forward. And we should see that we have good and decent save holes which are structurally okay, where we have a plug for draining when it's necessary, and that should be checked every time during the mooring operations. Some examples of good practice. We will see a split drum winch here with actually one turn of layers on the working part, and that is how it should be. Also here we will see correctly spooled mooring ropes on the rope drum. Again, a good example of how it should be done. Not always possible in the heat of the moment during mooring operations, but it is worthwhile after mooring to uncoil and to spool it in a proper way. Here we see a typical example of ropes that could bury into the lower turns, but the crew has used the dolly made of worn and old mooring ropes to put that in between the mooring line and the remaining turns on the drum, and that is going to prevent the rope of digging in further. So finally we come to mooring fittings, and I would say that we have four main categories of mooring fittings. We have the bollards, which are the single posts on the quay. We have the bitts, which are double posts on the ship. We have chocks for leading the ropes over the side towards the jetty or the terminal. And we have fair lead rollers, which do exactly what the word says. They are providing a fair lead with correct fleeting angles between the fair lead and the winch. Then we also, instead of having chocks, we may also have overboard roller fair leads, button type fair leads, and that is purely a decision that is made on the design table, what is the most appropriate or desirable. So when we look to the bollards, what do we see? We can actually see that, or we have to look to proper looping. Here, I mean, it may look a normal pattern, but you will see that this rope is squeezing the other one, causing damage. Big problem. The loop of this mooring rope is actually already seriously damaged just due to the compression issue. We also have to see that, I mean, if we are looping, that we are not, or that we are giving our tail lines a little bit of freedom so that they are not becoming jammed or anything like that. But definitely, these are the tail lines that I was referring to before. Good practice, and it's definitely a good thing to have. Also, I mean, ships which are coming alongside, ahead of us, or let's say in front of us, or aft of our own ship, I mean, they will use bollards, sometimes the same bollards as the ones that we have, and take care that they are not putting too much ropes on one set of bollards, because that is going to result in situations like we see here. Luckily, not too frequently, but as the photo illustrates, it does happen. The bits, very important. We use them to secure our mooring lines on board of the ship. So the surfaces, as we already explained, should be smooth. We should not have sharp edges. Also from the disc here, that should be sufficiently thick, preferably round-edged to prevent any damages. Should be structurally sound. The stopper eye for the rope, or for the stopper rope, should be sufficiently thick. If you look to this photograph here, you will see that the mooring, or that the steel of that eye is very thin. So knowing that we have to stopper of rope and that some load will come on that eye, I mean, that is important that it will not fail. Also, our stopper ropes have to be appropriate and to be in line with the type of mooring ropes that we are having on board. And obviously, this part of leftover, very thin piece of rope is not going to do the job properly and safely. What is good, though, is that we can see that the bits here are properly treated. They are properly marked, also the chock over here. So that is what we would like to see, together with sharp edges of the bit base structure, which are clearly and conspicuously marked. Overboard fair leads or chocks, surface should be smooth, properly identified. This, as we already said, should be avoided. And always remember that if you have chocks that you use for passing wires, that they may have rough surfaces, that they may have grooves which are not appropriate later on for passing ropes through. Then we have the roller fair leads. I mean, sometimes we call them old man's or dead man's, whatever. The point here is that they are used to provide a fair lead from the rope to the winch drum. And therefore, the roller should be free. and the rollers should be structurally sound because there is some load that is acting on those rollers. So if you see the picture in the upper right corner, you will see that there is a gap, that roller is having a gap between the roller and the base structure. It indicates that the pin is deformed. This is an accident waiting to happen, and actually that roller should not be used until it is properly repaired. What we also see very often are sharp turns around rollers, and sometimes it culminates in strangling of the rollers of the fair leads. What we see is that this is an absolutely dangerous situation that should be avoided at all times. First of all, due to the full turn that we have around, we create chafing and friction, heating damage, and we are going to put the full load of a mooring line onto that roller, and it is not made for that. In the book, volume 1 and volume 2, we expand more on that issue, but the point is that those rollers are there to guide the mooring rope and not actually to make a full turn around it and to secure it almost to the roller of the fair lead. All right. The roller surfaces should be smooth, not with jagged edges or sharp edges. The leads should be observed. They should definitely not be like this one. And by the way, if you see this type of situation, then most probably they have not coiled up the ropes in the right way on the drum and so on, to be investigated. And also here, you will see that the rope is not leading around the roller, but lower down, which is to be avoided. So slowly coming towards the end of our presentation here, but just a few more things to emphasize and not to overlook if we are looking to efficiency of mooring operations, is first of all that if we have to moor, and equally if we have to unmoor the vessel, we will have to set up a mooring meeting. I am strongly in favor of doing it because it will allow people to consider what is going to be done, what is going to be happening, or what is going to happen. So defining the mooring party, discussing the berthing and the mooring or unmooring maneuver that we are going to make, what equipment we are going to use, which winches, which ropes, with wires, considering if we have spare ropes readily available just in case of, what type of berth we are going to come alongside, and the pilot can of course help us with that information. Is it a berth, an open berth on an open, let's say, container yard, or is it in a general cargo port or area where we have a lot of warehouses which are taking off the effect of the wind to a certain extent? What side we are going to moor alongside? I mean, are we going to have a safe berth after all? That is something that is required under the charter party. What is the equipment that we have available on the terminal? What type of bollards? What type of hooks? Depending on the situation. We also have to consider the environmental conditions. Listen to the weather and the weather forecast for the port stay of the vessel, looking for tidal issues, currents, other traffic that is passing by. We definitely have to agree on a mooring plan. We need to know if we are going to use tugs, which lines are going to be used for that, the tugs lines, the ship lines. We have to be sure that we have set lines of communication between the mooring decks, between the people on the deck, and also between master, pilot, tugboats, and so on. It's always good and useful to be aware of that. And in the end, it may end up that we say, well, at this stage, this or this may become dangerous or risky. Then a risk assessment is definitely something to be considered. When we go from that meeting onto the mooring decks, there the officer has a big responsibility actually. And I think, in my opinion, it starts all with waking up, especially during nighttime, or mustering the people in sufficient time. I mean, don't wait for the last 5 minutes to get them out of their beds and then to say, yeah, come on, we have to get to the mooring stations quickly. No, it's much better and more efficient when you give them the time to prepare to go to the mooring stations in a proper way. Once they arrive, the officer has to check if the mooring party is complete, everyone is there, because all hands are needed. Definitely if they are all wearing the required personal protective equipment. So normally for mooring operations, that's helmet, overall, safety boots, and gloves. Gloves, you have to see, I mean, what type of equipment you are handling, whether it is suitable to wear gloves or not. There is some discussions about that going on. Check the safety. See that those mooring decks are safe, clean, well lit, that there is no clutter. As you can see on the photograph here, you see a damaged platform with an entangled piece of rope. I mean, this is a slip and fall hazard par excellence, I would say, and these things have to be observed first by the officer in charge. Then a practical test of the communication means can be the VHF, can be a walkie-talkie, or can be also a talk-back system, whatever you have, see that you have it, and perhaps also look into the possibility of having backup equipment ready to use. Once everyone is there, explain what is going to happen, prepare the equipment, see that you have sufficient heaving lines, flake out the mooring ropes in a proper way. It's all going to make your operation much easier and efficient. And check that the condition of the equipment is okay, and that you make a test wherever appropriate of the winch and so on. So for the ropes, for the heaving lines, for the stoppers, for the winches, all important. And once everything is done, confirm to the bridge that everything is okay and that you are ready to go. So to conclude, I would actually say, or I hope at least, that we have addressed a fair number of frequently seen problems. I tried in a very limited period to explain a little bit why some things are important. And I think that even if this is a relatively small set of do's and don'ts, I think that if we follow them, and if people on board are already told to follow these type of things, that we will see a significantly reduction in mooring accidents or problems. So we have also explained a few basic principles and good practices. And I think that for surveyors or superintendents and even shipboard crew who are joining us, that we can actually see that some inspection items have been tackled. Take them with you when you are involved in inspections, for sure. I mean, if you pick up something that is not okay, it may result in highlighting a problem, and it can save lives. And also, I think that if we see a number of those things, that we can actually say, well, for sure, if we see this type of things, the procedures that have been made or that are implemented may not always be so relevant for the specific type of ship or equipment, and it may be useful to review them and see if they can be improved. To round off, we know that there are some new rules and regulations, and they came actually into life because we are facing now issues with larger ships. We also see new materials. We also see that there are new mechanical systems available to help us in dealing with heavy and dangerous equipment. Last year, amendments have been made to SOLAS regarding to new guidelines for safe mooring for all ships. I mean, it goes for new ships, it goes for existing ships. New ships will already have to deal with more human-centric design-related issues, whereas existing ships will receive guidelines regarding maintenance, operation, and so on. So that is something that you can find on the internet for sure, but they are not expected to enter into force before the 1st of January 2024. However, my recommendation to those people who are involved with mooring would be to not to wait till the last moment, start early rather than late, and already see how those new requirements may affect your ship, your operations, your crew. Try to make inspections, try to consider maintenance, Try to consider replacement when you think that you may have to replace equipment. I mean, without stress, you generally make better decisions. And don't forget to provide and to include training into the total package. Training is still, I mean, the most important thing to get around mooring problems and mooring issues. And I would certainly recommend all of you to consider that very well, to consider it in procedures, to consider it in familiarization processes, because it can definitely save life and add to the efficiency of mooring operations. Finally, we see that there are some new technologies, and perhaps the one that I am that should receive an award, in my opinion, is the snapback arrestor ropes. I mean, they significantly reduce the effect of snapback, and I have especially included a link for you to have a look to YouTube and to see what actually is available. And you will see a short movie where you can see the devastating effect of a snapback and how those SBA ropes are actually enhancing safety tremendously. It's something to consider and to recommend whenever you have that opportunity. New technologies will in time also include smart ropes with sensors indicating the load that you have. Now, knowing the load is important, but it's more important to know how to manage and to balance the loads. We are going to have big data also for mooring equipment. There will be automated mooring equipment where mooring operations can be done almost fully automated, which is of course safe, which has certain advantages. We will see that human-centric design will really become more and more important. We get tools to calculate the loads that will be enforced on specific mooring patterns. And perhaps my last remark would be that even though we know that automated equipment will become available and will be used more and more in time, at this moment, we still have to deal with conventional mooring equipment, with winches, with windlasses, brake drums, capstans, and so on, mooring ropes and wires. It's dangerous equipment. Take care of it, and then it will take care of you. So I would actually like to thank you for your attention. My presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, but seeing the number of attendees to our meeting, we may not be able to answer all of them. If you have any question, don't hesitate. You can always drop a line on the 2 email addresses mentioned below, and we will try our best to give your question or inquiry the attention it deserves. Once again, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you safe mooring operations ahead. David, it's over to you. David, I think you are muted. Is that possible?
That is possible.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Walter. That was a fantastic presentation. Okay, not surprising. Loads and loads of questions. So where do we start? Probably the most frequently asked question here, Walter, is that the controversy about snapback zones marked on deck. 2 schools of thought. One, obviously, a snapback zone is a highly dangerous place and should be alerted, but would that create an environment where somebody standing just outside a snapback zone might feel unreasonably safe?
Well, basically, if we go back, we will see that attention has been drawn to snapback risks many years ago. And we have also seen that the Code of Safe Working Practice, that they have actually taken up that risk, and they have explained very well actually what needed to be done, what is the snapback zone. However, in order to illustrate what is the snapback zone? They made drawings whereby the decks were marked with the potential snapback area. And I think that over the years, I mean, that marking to illustrate what is the snapback zone has been considered as good practice, and people have been starting to paint snapback zones on the deck, and that to a certain extent that many people thought that it was the standard actually to do. What you have to remember with snapback zones or painting them on the deck is that every mooring pattern is different, unless you are on a trade, I mean, a fixed ferry trade, things like that. But normally, I mean, trading patterns will be different. And if then you are going to mark snapback zones, people will consider them as the fixed snapback zone, and that may lead to confusion. So recently, that issue has been raised, and what we can learn or the outcome of discussions which were held in that respect was actually to consider the full mooring deck as a dangerous zone. And again, we come back to training, train people that they are aware of what is snapback, how to deal with it, and especially the supervising officer who should be there to guide people and to warn them once they are doing dangerous things.
Thanks, Walter. Another question here from Sanjay. What is the correct policy for discarding or replacing synthetic mooring ropes? Should it be condition-based, running hour-based, or based on elongation?
The first thing, I mean, nowadays, and that is something that we have to recognize as well, nowadays we have a lot of different types of mooring ropes, different materials, different lays, all that type of things. And it becomes very complicated to have a general rule. However, as a general rule, I would say that it is always best to consult with the manufacturers to know what is possible, what is to be considered as a discard criteria. And secondly, to make a visual inspection for those failures that we showed during our presentation, for failures like fusion, damage, cutting, that type of things, they are already an indication that there is a problem. Definitely running hours is not a guideline. You can have a mooring rope that becomes damaged from the moment it is put in service. And if you would then say, well, okay, according to the manufacturer, it can still last for another 500 hours. I mean, that's going to be extremely dangerous, of course.
Okay, thank you. There are also quite a few questions on how to select the size and materials of mooring ropes.
How to, well, that is a very, let's say, a question that requires quite a lot of time to explain. What I would actually say that we have to consider is what trade we are on, what type of ship we have, what type of equipment we have, how many people we can afford to put on the mooring decks. I think it is something that is to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But things which are important are, of course, okay, what type of drum or winches do we have? What is the available storage space on the drum? What is the required, I mean, what can be, let's say, the conditions in which we have to operate the mooring arrangements and so on. So if you would like, or if the participant asking this question would like to have a deeper understanding of that, I would consult him, or I would advise him to go to volume 2, because there we have actually listed up all the different criteria that can be considered. But we have something like 15 or 20 of them. So, and each of them is important and needs careful consideration for a specific situation.
Okay, thanks, Walter. Question here from Bathula. how do you make a brake holding test for a winch?
There are, I mean, how you make it, I mean, basically you are going to use a hydraulic piston and you will try to create a load that is going to make your winch move. And at that moment, you will actually know what is the brake holding power of your winch. That process, how to do it, is again clearly described in one of our books. But on the other hand, I have also or let's say there are discussions going on people say, well, should we be using a torque key or should we make a brake test in the normal way? And my personal opinion there is that if you are using a torque key, you are actually trying to measure, or you are using the torque that you apply to on the brake handle, whereas with the brake test, you are really going to check the holding power or the brake capacity of your winch. And because we are interested in knowing the brake holding capacity, I think that, in my opinion, doing the test, the usual brake test, is preferred.
Okay, thanks, Walter. Question from Gary here. Says the standard length of mooring line is just over 200 meters long, and on many ships, this length is longer than need be and makes it difficult to store it and use it. Is it appropriate to cut the rope and splice it on board, and are there any regulations around that? Assuming that you have somebody on board that knows how to splice.
If I understand it well, I mean, you should basically have a situation where people say, well, in my case, I don't need 220 meters of line. It's too much. It's a problem to get it accommodated on the rope drum. Is that the question? And then to make it shorter?
Correct.
Okay. Well, okay, there are different options. You can actually look for a more suitable type of mooring line. That is what you can do, taking into account the winch specifications, I mean the drum diameter and so on. But you can also, if you just want to shorten the rope, I mean, that is, in my opinion, not really a problem, as well, because I mean, the area that you would cut, I mean, if you terminate it in the proper way and you connect it properly to the drum, then, I mean, you can actually use it in a proper way. Again, my advice in that type of situations would always be consult with the manufacturer before, and perhaps avoid this type of problems by specifying your order in a proper way, investigating if it would not be possible that you get a shorter mooring line than the standard size.
Thanks, Walter. There are quite a few questions and comments about seamanship. One in particular is Peter, the pilot, who says that the skills for being able to surge a line are diminishing, that most crews now they understand to cast off or to make fast, but the art of surging is diminishing. I suppose the question is, how do you learn how to surge a line? I mean, it's not something that you can learn in a simulator or in a classroom, is it?
I think there are two things. First of all, there needs to be some theoretical background, allowing people to understand what is going on and how you are going, I mean, what equipment you are going to use, the effect of improperly maintained equipment, I mean, rough bits, rough chocks and so on, which may cause a problem to the mooring lines. That is one thing. So the theoretics behind it should be learned at school or during courses or training. And then I think it is very important that at a certain moment, and it could be part of a training package on board, that people are making a little bit of an exercise in real life, that they see what equipment they have on board and how to do it in a practical way. There is no, at least as far as I know, there is no practical way to exercise this in a classroom. But it very well, and I think it is a very good question, because it is one of those things that is regularly done, that needs to be done, and where we indeed see that it is not uncommon that things go wrong during surging operations, and then we find out that in many cases it's a combination of lack of skills and knowledge, using the inappropriate equipment, improper maintenance of the equipment, and that is a good cocktail for having very serious accidents.
Absolutely, and as you know, one of the Nautical Institute's big areas of activity is in promoting mentoring, and that's a perfect example of where mentoring comes into its own, which is on deck seamanship. The question here from Enamel: how does the safe working load of a bollard get affected when the bollard is used to secure multiple ropes?
How does it, I mean, if we put too much lines on it, I mean, it can fail, as we could see on the slide that I used. Then I think it is the officer in charge on the mooring decks who has to supervise that the people ashore, for convenience sake, are not just putting too much lines on the bollard. If he thinks that it is too much, he should relay that to the master, and the master should confer or discuss this with the pilot in such a way that this matter can be cleared out.
Okay, thank you.
Also, it would also go if you would see that the bollards, or the structure to which the bollards are mounted, is of a poor quality. I mean, that is also something that I consider to be, let's say, one of the tasks or duties of the officer in charge on the mooring decks. He should inspect that everything that is going to receive the ship's lines is okay.
Okay, thanks, Walter. A question from Sanjay: what is the correct policy for discarding or replacing synthetic ropes? Oh, sorry, I've already asked that one.
We had that one already, David.
Yeah. This one is from Kingsley. Is it advised? I've answered that one as well. This one from Kenneth: what is the best way to tell if the safe working load of a vessel's bollard has been exceeded?
Okay, perhaps to be clear, but most of the time we refer to bollards when we talk about shore equipment, at the single post that we find on the quay. We talk about bits when which are the double posts actually on board of a ship. Now, one of the things that may happen is that, of course, when the bits are overloaded, we can see deformation of the deck structure. In the book, we have quite some examples of that. What may also be interesting to know is that sometimes bits can be pulled together. And the reason why that happens is because the mooring line is not really belayed in a proper way. We have all been explained in our young years that we should belay a mooring rope on the bits by figure of 8ing. But what has become much more the standard nowadays is to have on the leading post of a set of bits to make 1 or 2 full turns first before we start figure of 8ing. What is the risk if we don't do that is actually that the figure of 8 configuration on both of the posts of the bits is going to act as a pulley. And if you get loads, I mean, we have photographs of that as well. The bits will be pulled together in such a way that, of course, their structural strength is affected.
And you showed a couple photographs, and you've got some examples of bit damage on in your book, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Question from Gareth. What are your thoughts on sun damage or solar radiation, or does it affect ropes much today?
Yes, I mean, again, I mean, we have so many different types of ropes, but for sure, exposure to UV can affect the quality and the condition of the rope. And again, and I think it all fits very nicely within the future rules that will be implemented. I mean, is that people really take the time when they are ordering ropes to see, okay, what type of rope do I need? Check it, cross-check it with the design of the winch, because diameters and lengths and width of the barrel and so on, these are all things which are important to know when you are ordering a rope, that you say, well, okay, what type of rope, in what type of environment am I working, sailing, and so on. And for sure, if you are always working in sunny areas, and you may perhaps not have the possibility to store your ropes away, to cover them properly or whatever, I mean, then for sure, inquiring about the UV resistance of the rope with the manufacturer is absolutely crucial.
Thanks, Walter. Another reoccurring question here, and this is a tough one, Walter. It's about design. Number of crew have written in saying that they know that the layout of the mooring station is poor. The placement of the capstans and the rollers, making it very difficult for them to moor in certain situations. If the crew identify problems of design, what can they do about it?
Okay, I mean, I think it is a very good question, and it is absolutely correct. We do see quite frequently that crews do not have any other option than to do it wrong, right? And that is actually related to the design, and that design that starts on the designer table. So actually, what I would recommend is, first of all, in a designing stage, is to get people involved who are practically dealing with moorings on a regular basis. Secondly, to answer the question of the crew, okay, what can we do? I think this comes forward when you are holding your pre-mooring or unmooring meeting, where you say, well, okay, what are we going to do? What do we need? And so on. And that you say, well, this or this will not be possible because of specific design features. That actually at that moment you have to go through the process to analyze what you are going to do, to see if it is risky, and to carry out a risk analysis. That is the only way to prevent that you are going to enter into a situation that may cause havoc.
I have great sympathy for the crews who have to make do with what they have. But what I would say is that if you think that something is inherently dangerous or not as effective as it could be, report that to your DPA. That's what they're there for. You may not get an immediate response in terms of a change of design, but if the DPAs do get a picture of poor design, they can influence future design. And I have been on ships where in the 5-year inspection, when we go into the shipyard, I have seen roller fairleads moved to a better position based on crew input. So it is possible. It won't happen overnight, but just accepting that it's bad and getting on with it is probably not the best option. Right.
No, if I can add something to that, David, we frequently see that there is a poor design and that the crew is struggling in getting things right. Now, from our point of view, of course, if you are an inspector, you will have to raise a defect or an observation on what is going on. the approach of a risk analysis may be preferred rather than doing making changes, unless of course the changes there is no other option, in such a way that making those changes is something which generally involves redesign, strengthening of structural members underneath the deck where specific items have to be installed and so on. So it is definitely not something that can be done easily and quickly, and it will generally at that stage involve the advice from classification societies as well to approve it afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Walter. Another common question here is, we've all heard that there's talk about autonomous ships, which must mean that there has to be autonomous mooring systems. What do you think might happen in the next 10, 15 years with the new technology? You gave a couple examples of new technology and how it's going to be used, but in your opinion, how quickly might that come into the industry?
Well, there are definitely a number of triggers to promote automated mooring. First of all, the fact that we can avoid accidents. People may be not exposed to such the physical threats of parting mooring ropes and so on. Another thing that came in more recently are, of course, the work and resting hours. It makes it very difficult actually to get sufficient people on the mooring decks and to comply with work and resting hours. And automated systems, they may actually provide an answer to that. Also, we have to see what is the turnaround time of vessels. Mooring operations, and if you want to do them properly, they take some time. With very short port calls nowadays, we have to consider that time is an issue, and some automated systems may actually significantly reduce the time for mooring. So yeah, that is actually a decision that has to be made. It may be a little bit, again, terminal and ship specific, but for sure, I think that there is an incentive for looking into further possibilities for using automated systems.
Thanks, Walter. And we've seen that, particularly in the container trade, that some of the adoption of the suction cup style moorings is specifically down to time. It pays in the time savings when you have rapidly changing draft due to tides, whether you have need to shift the ship back and forth. Those certainly do define a business case. Well, Walter, I've got my eye on the clock. We've been going quite a while here, so I think we will wrap it up. A lot of the questions, and this isn't just a sales pitch, but a lot of the questions that have been asked are answered in these two volumes. This is the kind of work that we at the Nautical Institute do to identify best practice and share best practice. And if you want to be part of that, please do join as a member. The slides will not be made available, but a recording will be on our YouTube channel by tomorrow, possibly by the end of today. So feel free to look at it again. There was a lot of information, a lot of good information in there. And I wish everybody to stay safe. Be careful of the moorings. Be careful of the viruses, and stay safe. But Walter, I'd particularly like to thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. I know it's taken you a while to put it back together, and it's a lifetime of snapshots of good and bad. And those pictures were worth 1,000 words each, and you had 1,000 pictures, so that's a lot of words. So Walter, thank you very much for your time today.
It was a great pleasure and an honor, David. Thank you very much for the opportunity.